Good morning. In the name of the Department of Education, our 25 million learners, our 847,000 teachers, our non-teaching staff, our officials, and advocates of education around the world, in the region, and in our country. We congratulate you for taking the time to participate as actively as possible in this webinar, which we are putting up to celebrate International Day of Education. This is the day when we all pause from our frenzied exertions in our efforts to contain the COVID-19 pandemic and turn our attention almost exclusively, that is, to matters of education. In the Philippines, education is the most important gift that our country can give to our young people, our learners, and to the Filipinos, to the rest of the Filipinos. Education is a part of our cultural aspirations. People are prepared to make all the sacrifices necessary, do everything to make sure that our children get the education we believe they deserve and which will prepare them for the life that lies ahead of them when they leave school. The onset of the pandemic has absolutely changed in a very profound way the way we look at education, the way we transmit learnings, and the way we deal with each other and look at the state of our country as well as the state of our education system. And so when the pandemic set in and our country declared a lockdown of the entire country, our first concern in the department was continuity. So this is the first and foremost important advocacy that we put forth and which we campaigned for so fiercely and vigorously. And this is education must continue in spite of, because of, and in the light of all the complications that the pandemic has brought in. So first among our goals was to ensure continuity of education. And in the Philippines, as all of you know, there was a very vigorous debate on whether we should close schools even as we were involved in a lockdown, and then followed by the various forms of quarantine regulations which were imposed. So the first thing we fought for was continuity. And for us, it was a major victory in the debate whether we should continue education or close down our schools. And the president supported us in these efforts. A second concern and advocacy, which we strongly emphasized and which I believe you are all familiar with, especially our teachers, our staff, our officials, and our learners, is that education, as we were going to implement it with our learning continuity plan, which was the very first activity that we engaged in, has to be contextualized. We all agreed that there would be no one size which should fit all schools, because with more than 60,000 schools scattered all over the country and 25 million learners, it would be impossible, unrealistic, and inappropriate for us to impose one single design for continuing education. So contextualization was a very important concept that we turned to. The third activity that we engaged in, because we did not open classes according to the regular schedule, which is in June, we opened our schools on October 5, is that the curriculum, of course, had to be reworked. And this was the toughest, the most difficult, the most contentious issue of all. What should a curriculum look like at the time of the pandemic, with very limited time left for us to catch up, and with so many challenges which have to be faced and resolved? And so the decision then was to reduce the learning requirements, competences from 15,000 to 5,000 for K to 12. So curriculum adjustment, curriculum changes were very important and crucial. Another issue which was strongly debated, and this was all done in a very brief period of time, at the time of lockdown, followed by very stringent quarantine regulations of our interagency task force on emerging diseases. And this is the mode of delivery. The agreement was that we would utilize blended learning, but blended learning without the face-to-face component, since the president did not want to risk the lives of children in the pandemic with face-to-face learning. So we decided on blended learning without face-to-face learning, without face-to-face sessions. And of course, this entailed so much adjustment, so much noise, and so much debate from all sectors in the department, as well as from the rest of the country. Parents, politicians, also taking into consideration the political, the social, and economic environment. Another consideration, and perhaps we like to think it's the most important, of course, is the quality of teaching. The mode of teaching, the mode of transmission was decided on, which of course implied that we will have to transition to more effective ways of transmitting learning through our teachers. And the teachers were the most important component, and they held the most important role in the transition process. So we engaged our teachers in numerous webinars, and we tried our best to prepare them for the challenging tasks ahead. It helped that we leaned heavily on technology. We knew, for example, at the beginning of the Learning Continuity Program, that in a country of 100 million humans, there were more cell phones, smart cell phones at that, gadgets and all, than humans. So we had 150 million cell phones in the country, and in a country of 100 million people. So we thought that technology would be of great use to us. It turned out, however, that when enrollment time came in June, because children started enrolling in June, but classes opened in October, it turned out that most teachers, most parents, and the children themselves preferred the traditional printed module. And as you can imagine, and as all of you remember from all the noise that erupted on the blended learning use of printed material, um, the demand for printed material was so huge that the costs were, of course, skyrocketing and sky high. The most expensive mode of delivering learning, of course, is the printed module. And not only that, we were very aware, we were very conscious that very heavy dependence on printed module materials would impact very heavily on the environment, as well as entail horrendous costs to our already depleted financial resources in government. So at the back of our minds, we realized that we could not sustain the use of printed modules indefinitely, because these would require continuous printing of new materials with a very strong demand for paper, as well as the cutting down of trees for the production of paper, the machines, ink, and so on and so forth. And we recognized at the time that technology, ICT, other forms of learning modalities like television and radio would be so much less financially burdensome and comparatively less harmful to the environment. At the same time, we knew that whether there would be COVID or not, the dimensions, the landscape, and the methods in education, as well in society itself, was already changing rapidly. So we initiated the formation of a futures unit, which would try to perceive and try to see, try to discern what is going to happen eventually in education, COVID or not, because changes were happening very rapidly. And so the impacts of all these exertions in the matter of a few months, massive changes which seemed almost impossible to attain, like the major changes in the curriculum, which placed so much pressure on our curriculum group, the review of our physical facilities, the quick development, the urgent development of ICT and platforms, alternatives to printed material like our DepEd Commons, television and radio, was horrendous in terms of scope and in terms of the demand, the work that was necessary to be done. And so I hope that the public, I hope that our teachers appreciate, and they themselves were part of the efforts, all that had to be done in a short period of time to assure that education will continue. Changes in curriculum, for which the department was heavily and viciously excluded for errors. Some of them were ours, some of them were not ours at all. And the noise that was coming from those who expected magic, who expected the servants of the DepEd, the advocates of education, to deliver in such a very short period of time at also a period when the struggle, the attention of the country, the funds of the country were poured into the anti-COVID effort. So the implications were largely on the transition efforts, shifting the curriculum, shifting our idea of what classrooms will be like, shift in the way we teach, we deliver knowledge, and shift even in our administrative operations. To do all of this simultaneously in a brief period of time amidst threats, amidst criticism, amidst loud noise, and where I believe very challenging tasks which the department underwent. And I like to think that in spite of all these challenges, the department faced up and confronted the need for all these changes. Also, I have always believed that as a student of public administration, that organizations, institutions exist and move within an environment. An environment necessarily can be hostile. It is always changing. Our environments are composed of the political environment. We had the houses of Congress and the Senate and the House. We had the executive. And then we also have the social environment because many people were affected. They lost their jobs. They lost their financial resources. And then you also have the economic environment. The pandemic was followed by a downturn in the economy, and this had a profound effect on education, profound effect on the enrollment numbers, for example, for which some sectors blame the Department of Education, but for which we also know that because of the downturn in the economy, many parents were not able to send their children to private schools because the downturn in enrollment, the reduction in enrollment was exclusively in the private schools. It also resulted in the migration of students and learners from the private schools to the public schools. And also, in addition to all of these happenings in the environment, all these varieties, political, social, economic, we were engaged in an ideological battle where those who were critical of the system of government, the way it operated, also engaged the department on matters of curriculum, on matters of education and subjects, etc., were also bitterly and viciously criticized, such that it reached a personal level wherein the Secretary of Education and its leading officials were excoriated and criticized even as they were working very hard to continue to make sure that education continues. And so the impacts, for example, can perhaps be felt only maybe a few years from now. Whether we did right in continuing education, whether we did right in adjusting the curriculum, whether we did right in our efforts to shift from printed material using a lot of paper to technology, which is so much cheaper. But of course, as can be expected, even as the noise concentrated on what is described as the bad news, all the terrible things that were thrown at the Department of Education, all the vicious accusations which were untrue. In spite of this, there was also a great deal of good news. Civil society came in, business came in, and of course, government did not stint in its support for education. Both houses of Congress were very, very supportive because they knew the tremendous challenge that the department faced in the light of this pandemic. So the impact on our learners, probably we will see in a number of years. And we did not forget to take care also of the increasing needs of our teachers. Needs for financial remuneration, more benefits, and at the same time needs to assist them as they transition from one method of teaching to another way of teaching, to enhance use of technology, to different ways of communicating with the students because face-to-face was not allowed. And so we are now celebrating, and with good reason, in the Philippines, the International Day of Education. We believe that we have been faithful to the expectations, to the requirements of what education should be in a country like the Philippines. And so, as we reflect, as we pause on this day and think of what perhaps the other countries are doing to celebrate, as we discuss aspects of international, regional, and other issues related to education and the pandemic, that we do not forget that good things are happening in the Philippines. Education continued in spite and maybe because of the pandemic. We continued even as face-to-face teaching and class sessions were not allowed. And now we are strengthening the technology side of education so that we not only cut down on costs, but also become much more efficient in keeping in touch, in keeping abreast with all the developments in science, technology, engineering, mathematics, but without forgetting our history, our culture as a people, and using these aspects of our history and our culture as a way of enriching our curriculum, as a way of more effective teaching. I have always admired the way our teachers have developed ways of including or harmonizing and integrating aspects of our culture and our history in the teaching of what we describe as the hard sciences, like mathematics, like science. And I have seen this for myself. I have seen students dancing to concepts in mathematics. I have seen students singing, painting, making stories which are translated from the various aspects of our culture. I have seen how mythology, I have seen how literature has influenced science, technology, mathematics, and I have always said that our artists, our writers, our creative thinking people have always been so much more advanced because their minds are free, because their spirits are free, and they are able to envision what the future will be like for us and for our children. And so I close with our most grateful thanks to our international partners, our regional partners, our counterparts from the other countries, as well as thanks to our teachers who, along with us, bore with the terrible burden of transitioning to COVID-19 education, with all its demands on teaching, on curriculum, on technology, as well as all the requirements to make us more effective in delivering learning. But at the end of the day, the bottom line is our learners. The bottom line is our student. And if we are able, as I always say in my graduate schools before, if I'm able to open more windows in their minds, open their eyes a bit wider, add to their knowledge, then we would be happy enough. Also, we talk about outstanding learners. A number of our learners have been competing in international competitions in math and science, winning medals, and they have been excelling in their different fields. We have just welcomed the National Academy of Sports, which combines the physical, the sports aspects of education, which in itself is a science, to further enhance education. We are strengthening science in agriculture. And at the same time, we want our children to retain what has been taught by our forebears, what we describe as good manners and right conduct, a sense of history as a people, our unique character, our unique identity, even as we move forward with technology. So I end with a quote on this very, very close relationship between the learner and the teacher. And my favorite author has said that where there is an outstanding learner, where there is a wonderful, promising student, you can be sure that there is an outstanding teacher. And all of us know this. We remember the teachers who have molded us. We remember the teachers who taught us our first lessons, whether we were still in kindergarten or in grade school. And so, teachers, learners, non-teaching staff in the department, we thank you for taking this very difficult journey with us. I'm reminded of Moses and the Israelites crossing the desert for 40 years under very, very difficult circumstances. And we are crossing the pandemic under also challenging circumstances, but full of inspiration, full of creativity, and most important of all, full of hope. Thank you very much.